Tonight, we're going to explore how ancient humans first came to stand at the edge of the sea and realize that the water in front of them was not necessarily the end of the world. You are on a prehistoric shoreline now, with cool sand beneath your feet and the smell of salt settling lightly on your skin. Behind you are familiar paths, trees, streams, hunting grounds, and places where fires have burned many evenings in a row. Ahead is something far less cooperative. Water moves constantly. It hides what lies beneath it. It reflects the sky so convincingly that distance becomes difficult to judge. Somewhere beyond the horizon there may be land, or there may be nothing at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, you can post where in the world you are listening from, along with your local time. There is something pleasantly appropriate about imagining people scattered across modern coastlines while we think about those much older shores. Now, dim the lights, and let the horizon become a little wider. You stand where land and sea meet, in a world without harbours, maps, compasses, weather forecasts, or cheerful signs pointing toward the nearest ferry terminal. The coast is not a neat line. It twists through bays, river mouths, rocky shelves, beaches, marshes, cliffs, lagoons, and estuaries. Every few miles it seems to offer a different puzzle, yet the shoreline also gives you an unusual abundance of clues. You hear seabirds before you see them. You notice crabs moving over wet sand as the tide retreats. Shellfish cling to rocks. Fish gather in shallow pools. Seaweed collects in long, damp ribbons. Farther along the beach, pieces of wood arrive from places you cannot see. The ocean carries objects toward you. That simple fact matters. A branch floating offshore may seem ordinary, but it demonstrates something important. Solid things do not necessarily sink. A bundle of reeds trapped together after a storm may drift surprisingly far. A fallen tree can remain buoyant long enough to become a temporary platform. You do not need a theory of displacement. You only need eyes, curiosity, and perhaps one member of the group who's unusually willing to climb onto questionable pieces of driftwood. Every community has someone like that. The earliest encounters with water are probably not heroic expeditions. They are small experiments. You cross a stream by holding onto a log. You wade into a lagoon while carrying food above your head. You push floating branches into the shallows and discover that they support weight more effectively when tied or tangled together. None of this requires a grand plan to conquer the ocean. It begins with ordinary movement. For much of the Ice Age, global sea levels are lower than today because enormous quantities of water are locked inside continental ice sheets. At times, the ocean surface falls more than 100 meters below modern levels. Coastlines shift outward. Large areas that are underwater today become dry plains. From your viewpoint, the planet itself seems to rearrange the challenge. Some journeys that look maritime on a modern map would once involve long walks across exposed land. Rivers follow different courses, bays shrink, islands join larger land masses. Hunting grounds extend into regions now hidden beneath waves. But lower seas do not remove every obstacle. Channels remain. You may stand on one shore and see another piece of land in the distance, perhaps softened by haze. This is psychologically different from sailing toward an empty horizon. You know where you're going. The destination is visible. Imagine the difference. One journey asks you to leave solid ground without certainty. Another asks you to cross a moving strip of water toward a dark ridge you can already see. The second challenge is still dangerous, but it feels comprehensible. Your mind begins measuring the sea without numbers. How long does the sun move while you watch the opposite shore? How quickly do clouds travel? How far does a bird appear to fly before disappearing? How hard does the current pull when you step waist deep into the water? Knowledge grows from repetition. You learn that the sea changes with the moon, even if you do not yet understand why. You see water climb higher over familiar rocks. then withdraw. You recognize calm mornings and rough afternoons. You notice that a protected bay behaves differently from an exposed headland. The coast becomes a calendar written in movement. Physical evidence makes one broad fact unavoidable. Prehistoric people are not passive inhabitants trapped inside tiny territories, or they move, adapt, explore, and repeatedly enter landscapes that demand new solutions. Along the shore, those solutions may begin with food. A rocky beach at low tide becomes a temporary market without prices, opening hours, or suspiciously expensive bottled water. You gather shellfish, catch stranded fish, search tidal pools, and collect edible plants growing near brackish marshes. Coasts can be generous. They can also be unpredictable. Storms erase familiar features overnight. Tides trap the careless. Waves pull objects away faster than expected. Salt water cannot safely replace fresh drinking water. A beach that offers food one season may become difficult during another, so you learn caution alongside curiosity. Perhaps this is one reason early crossings become possible. The sea is never completely foreign to people who live beside it. Even if you remain on land most of the time, you observe the water daily. Its sounds enter sleep. Its smell clings to tools and clothing. Its behavior becomes part of ordinary life. In your ears, the crash of surf gradually changes from meaningless noise into information. A heavy repeating break may warn of hidden rocks. A quieter patch may mark sheltered water. Foam reveals current. Floating debris shows direction. You begin to notice patterns, and patterns are the beginning of navigation. Not navigation with instruments, of course. There is no polished compass waiting inside a leather case. You're not unfolding a map beside the fire and complaining that the scale is inconvenient. Instead, the landscape itself becomes memory. A crooked headland resembles an animal's back. A pale cliff shines in morning light. A distant island appears only when the air is clear. A cluster of rocks becomes visible at low tide. You remember these things because forgetting can be expensive. Children grow up hearing which beaches are safe, which inlets flood quickly, and which offshore rocks attract birds. Knowledge becomes social long before it becomes written. Someone notices something, someone survives because of it, and the observation enters shared memory. This is how a dangerous environment becomes familiar. Oddly enough, one of the strangest tools in prehistoric coastal learning may simply be rubbish. Broken shells, fish bones, burned stones, discarded tools, and food remains accumulate where people repeatedly camp. Much later, archaeologists examine such deposits and discover that ancient shorelines were not merely passed through. They were lived beside, harvested, revisited, and understood. A heap of old shells is not glamorous. It does not look like the beginning of an ocean exploration. But it tells you that people stay long enough to learn. That learning includes seasonal rhythms. Certain fish appear at particular times. Birds gather before migrations. Storm patterns shift. Water temperature changes. Rivers swell and carry debris toward the coast. The environment becomes predictable enough to encourage slightly larger risks. Perhaps you begin by moving parallel to shore rather than directly away from it. A floating platform or crude craft allows you to bypass cliffs. You travel across a bay instead of walking around it. You cross the mouth of a river where swimming would be difficult. The advantage is immediate. Water can shorten distance. This is an important mental transformation. A sea route is not only something separating two places, it can also connect them more efficiently than land. You look along a rugged coastline and see steep hills, thick vegetation, and difficult ground. Then you look toward the smooth curve of the bay. The dangerous option may also be the easier one. Historians still argue whether the first meaningful sea crossings are primarily deliberate voyages, accidental drifts, or some mixture of both. Archaeologists face a frustrating problem because the earliest boats are made from materials that decay. Wood, reeds, bark, fibre, and skin rarely survive for tens of thousands of years in ordinary conditions, so the craft often disappears. The destination does not. When humans appear on land that could only be reached by crossing water, the vanished vessel leaves behind an invisible signature. Something carried them there. Scholars bicker over exactly how intentional some early crossings must have been. A storm can push a floating platform away from shore. A group fishing near the coast can be carried farther than expected. A damaged raft can drift for days. Accidents certainly happen, but repeated settlement is harder to explain through luck alone. A single frightened group arriving on an island is one thing. A population surviving there, exchanging knowledge, finding food, and continuing across generations suggests something more organized. You do not need a perfect ship. You need enough people, enough supplies, enough knowledge, and enough good fortune. That combination is difficult, but not impossible. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing beside a group preparing for one of these modest early crossings. The craft is unimpressive. Perhaps several logs are fastened together with plant fibre. Perhaps bundles of reeds have been tied tightly enough to create buoyancy. Perhaps it's something simpler, a naturally floating trunk improved by human hands. No one calls it technology. It is simply the thing that works. You touch the surface. The wood is rough and damp. Fibre bindings tighten as they soak. A stone tool lies nearby. Useful for cutting or scraping. Food is wrapped or carried in whatever containers local materials allow. There is no dramatic speech. No one declares the beginning of maritime history. Someone checks the water. Someone looks at the distant shore. Someone decides that the wind is manageable, and then feet leave the beach. The first moments are probably awkward. Balance feels strange. Every movement shifts the platform. Water splashes over the side as the current seems stronger once you are inside it. The shoreline behind you begins to shrink. This is the emotional heart of the crossing. For almost all your life, safety means solid ground. Now solid ground is receding, yet the destination remains visible. That matters enormously. You can point toward it. You can correct your direction. You can compare your movement against cliffs or trees. Even if the crossing lasts only a short time, the experience changes what the sea means. You discover that water has distance, but distance can be crossed. Once that possibility exists, every visible island becomes a question. What grows there? Are there animals? Is there fresh water? Can people live there? Curiosity joins necessity. Perhaps population pressure encourages movement. Perhaps storms damage familiar resources. Perhaps groups search for new fishing grounds. Perhaps conflict makes another shore appealing. Perhaps someone simply sees smoke, birds, or vegetation suggesting usable land. No agreement has been reached on whether one single motive dominates early maritime expansion. Human movement is rarely that tidy. People travel for mixed reasons now, and there is little reason to imagine prehistoric decisions as simpler. Fear, hunger, curiosity, family ties, competition, opportunity, and sheer restlessness may all play a role. The sea waits without explaining itself. You learn it anyway. As evening settles over the prehistoric beach, the horizon darkens. The distant land becomes a shadow and then disappears. The smell of smoke mixes with salt. Wet stones cool beneath your feet. Tomorrow, the opposite shore will return with the light. And now you know something your ancestors may once have considered impossible. It can be reached. You move eastward through a world of islands, channels, volcanoes, forests, and narrow seas, where the map of the Ice Age looks very different from the one hanging in a modern classroom. The air is warm and heavy. Rain gathers quickly over distant ridges. Salt dries on your skin. Somewhere beyond a line of bright water, another island rises like a dark green wall. This is island Southeast Asia, one of the most important regions in the story of early human seafaring. During periods of lower sea level, much of western Indonesia joins the Asian mainland into a vast landmass often called Sunda. Borneo, Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula become connected by exposed plains. Large animals move across country that is now underwater. Humans can travel enormous distances without ever stepping into a boat. Then the geography changes. East of this broad landmass lies a region known as Wallacea, a chain of islands separated by deep water channels. Even when sea levels fall dramatically, these channels remain flooded. There is no hidden land bridge waiting beneath the waves. To reach those islands, people must cross water. That simple fact makes Wallacea extraordinary. You stand on a shoreline perhaps tens of thousands of years ago and stare toward land visible across a strait. The crossing may not look immense by modern standards, but there is no bridge, no ferry, no engine, and no guarantee that the wind will remain gentle. The water between islands is deep and alive with current. You cannot simply wait for the tide to expose a path. You must float. Archaeological evidence confirms that early humans reached several islands in Wallacea at astonishingly ancient dates. On the island of Flores, stone tools reveal the presence of hominins far earlier than the arrival of our own species. Later, Homo sapiens also enters this island world and moves through a maze of water barriers. The region becomes a natural laboratory for human ingenuity. Every crossing teaches you something new. One island may sit close enough to see clearly from another. Another may appear only on a bright morning when cloud lifts from the horizon. Some channels are narrow but violent. Others are broader and calmer. Distance is only part of the problem. Currents matter just as much. The Indonesian archipelago sits between the Pacific and Indian Oceans, creating complex flows of water through deep channels. Even today, some straits can be powerful and unpredictable. In a prehistoric craft, the effect must feel enormous. You push away from shore expecting to travel east, and the water quietly carries you south. The current does not care about your intentions, so you begin learning to compensate. You choose departure points carefully. You notice whether the tide is rising or falling. You watch floating leaves to judge direction. You study the angle of waves against rocks. This is not theoretical knowledge. It is knowledge felt in the body. Your hands tighten around a paddle or pole. Your shoulders learn the rhythm of correction. Your ears recognize the sound of current accelerating near a headland. A journey across a strait becomes a calculation made through memory. One mainstream fact stands out clearly. Wallacea is never fully connected to continental Asia during the Ice Age. Geological evidence shows that deep marine channels persist even when sea levels are far lower than today. That means people who enter Wallacea are not simply wandering across exposed plains, they are crossing sea. This matters because it pushes maritime behaviour far deeper into prehistory than older theories once allowed. For a long time, some scholars imagined early humans as reluctant sailors who only developed serious seafaring very late. Wallacea makes that picture difficult to maintain. The islands sit there like witnesses. You cannot explain them away with a convenient vanished bridge. The human presence is real, so the water crossing must also be real. Exactly what kind of vessel carries people remains uncertain. Wooden rafts are one possibility. Bamboo is another. Bundles of reeds may be used in some environments. Hollowed logs may become practical where suitable trees and tools are available. Organic materials decay rapidly in tropical climates, so direct evidence is scarce. You're left with stone tools, bones, settlement sites, and geography. The boat itself vanishes. The voyage remains. A curious footnote appears on Flores, where the discovery of Homo floresiensis, a small-bodied hominin species, adds another layer of mystery. These people live on the island long before modern humans become established there. Their presence raises a remarkable question. How does a hominin population reach Flores in the first place? Flores has deep water separating it from neighbouring land masses. Even during periods of lower sea level, some form of crossing appears necessary. Perhaps ancestors of Homo floresiensis drift accidentally. Perhaps they use primitive rafts. Perhaps repeated crossings occur over long spans of time. No agreement has been reached on whether these earlier hominins possessed deliberate maritime skills comparable to later human seafarers. The evidence cannot yet settle the matter. But the possibility alone changes the atmosphere of the ancient coast. You imagine a world where crossing water may not be a sudden invention belonging to one brilliant generation. It may emerge through many experiments by different human groups over immense stretches of time. Some succeed. Some disappear. Some journeys leave no trace at all. The sea is excellent at erasing evidence. A wooden platform sinks. Fibre ropes rot. A shoreline campsite disappears beneath rising water. Tens of thousands of years pass. Then an archaeologist finds a stone flake in a cave and realizes that someone once crossed a channel to get there. The detective work is almost absurdly indirect, yet the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. As Homo sapiens spreads into Wallacea, the island world offers both challenge and reward. Coastal environments provide fish, shellfish, turtles, birds, and plant foods. Forest interiors offer additional resources. Different islands contain different combinations of animals and edible plants. This creates movement. You may travel not because one island is poor, but because another offers something unusual. Perhaps a seasonal food source draws people across a strait. Perhaps a group follows birds. Perhaps distant smoke reveals that other humans are already there. Perhaps family groups split and reconnect. Island life encourages networks. Once people occupy more than one island, crossings can become social as well as practical. The sea no longer separates strangers. It separates relatives. That changes motivation. You do not need to imagine grand colonizing fleets. A few families moving between nearby islands can create regular maritime routes over generations. A child grows up hearing that an uncle lives across the water. A marriage partner arrives from another shore. Tools made from a particular stone appear where that stone does not naturally occur. Objects begin to tell stories of movement. Archaeologists pay close attention to such materials because they can reveal exchange between islands, stone, shell, and ornaments sometimes travel surprisingly far. Even a small object can become proof of connection. You hold a shell ornament polished smooth by fingers and imagine it passing from one person to another. It may cross water more than once. Its value may be decorative, social, symbolic, or all three. The object is tiny. The network behind it is not. In these island societies, knowledge must become communal. One person knows a safe landing place. Another remembers where fresh water can be found. Someone knows the best season for crossing. Someone else recognizes clouds that often form above high land. Navigation begins as a shared memory system. There are no written instructions. There are stories. There are demonstrations. There are repeated journeys. Young people learn by watching. They learn which winds are dangerous, which reefs cut feet, which beaches are exposed to surf, and which coves offer shelter. A mistake can be costly, so memory gains authority. You can almost hear an elder warning a younger traveller not to leave when the current turns. The tone is probably familiar to anyone who has ever ignored practical advice and regretted it later. Ancient life contains plenty of those moments. Oddly enough, animals may help reveal the presence of unseen land. Birds commuting between feeding grounds and nesting sites can indicate direction. Floating branches may carry insects or leaves from another island. Cloud formations can gather over elevated terrain even when the land itself lies below the horizon. The sky becomes part of the map. So does smell. After long hours on the water, the scent of vegetation can drift toward you before the shoreline becomes clear. Wet earth, flowers, smoke, or forest odours may announce land in ways modern people rarely notice. Your senses sharpen because they have to. You're not staring at an instrument panel. You're reading the world directly. The crossing itself may feel surprisingly quiet. There is the slap of water against the craft. There is the creak of fibre bindings. There is breathing. Perhaps someone speaks occasionally, but much of the journey is observation. Every person watches the destination. If clouds hide it, tension rises. If the current pushes too strongly, paddling becomes harder, the body becomes tired, salt gathers on lips. Then a shoreline begins to grow larger. Trees separate from the dark mass. Rocks become visible. Waves break against a beach. The island stops being an idea. It becomes ground. Landing may be as dangerous as crossing. A steep beach can overturn a raft. Reefs can shred bindings. Surf can throw people against rock. So knowledge of landing places matters just as much as knowledge of open water. You aim for a sheltered cove, feet touch sand, hands drag the craft upward. For a few moments, everyone is wet, exhausted, and probably very pleased with solid ground. Then practical life begins. Fresh water must be found. Shelter must be chosen. Food must be gathered. A voyage only becomes settlement if survival follows arrival. This is where archaeological evidence becomes especially important. Sites in caves and rock shelters across Wallacea show repeated occupation. People do not merely touch these islands and leave. They live there. They adapt. They incorporate marine foods into daily life. They develop familiarity with local environments. The ocean becomes part of routine existence. Scholars bicker over how planned the earliest Homo sapiens movements through Wallacea really are. Some emphasize deliberate exploration and navigational skill. Others suggest that short hops, accidental drift, and gradual expansion could account for much of the pattern. The debate continues because prehistoric intention is difficult to excavate. Stone does not preserve motivation. A shell does not explain why someone carried it. But the cumulative evidence points toward people who are increasingly comfortable with maritime landscapes. You stand on one island and see another, then another beyond that. The geography encourages a stepwise imagination. A channel is crossed, a new coast is learned, a farther island becomes visible. Each successful movement expands the known world. Not infinitely, just enough. The sea changes from empty space into a series of remembered routes. Some are safe, some are feared, some are only attempted under certain conditions. And somewhere in that humid island world, surrounded by deep channels and volcanic ridges, people begin to build a tradition of crossing water that is no longer rare or accidental. It becomes a part of being human in an archipelago. The water ahead looks wider now. You are standing somewhere along the eastern edge of the island world, where the green ridges behind you are familiar enough to feel safe, but the land beyond the horizon belongs to another vast region. The morning air is warm. Insects hum near the trees. Salt sits lightly on your lips. Out at sea, long swells lift and settle with a slow rhythm, making the distance seem almost peaceful. Almost. Beyond those channels lies Sahul, the Ice Age continent formed when lower sea levels join Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania into one enormous landmass. The name is modern. The landscape is ancient. When global sea levels fall, huge areas of continental shelf emerge from the ocean. Northern Australia reaches farther towards the islands of Southeast Asia. New Guinea is attached to Australia by broad plains. Tasmania joins the southern mainland. Rivers cross country that will eventually disappear beneath shallow seas. But even at the lowest sea levels, Sahul is not connected to the islands to its west. Deep water remains. To reach it, humans must sail, and that geographical fact gives these migrations their extraordinary importance. You can shorten the distances with exposed land, but you cannot eliminate the sea. At some point, People step onto floating craft and leave one shore without being able to walk the rest of the way. Researchers broadly agree that modern humans reached Sahul at least around 50,000 years ago, and some archaeological evidence suggests settlement may be considerably earlier. Sites in northern Australia preserve traces of human activity deep in the late Pleistocene, including stone tools, grinding stones, ochre, and other signs of a settled human presence. The exact timing is still debated. The crossing itself is not. You cannot reach Sahul by wandering across dry ground. You have to cross multiple channels. Your mind drifts toward the preparation. A journey of this kind is different from slipping across a narrow strait in sight of a neighbouring island. Some stretches of water may require you to travel far enough that land disappears behind you before the next coast becomes clear. That moment changes everything. The world becomes water in every direction. No cliff remains to guide your eye. No familiar beach waits behind your shoulder. Only waves, sky, clouds, and memory remain. This is where simple transport begins to become true seafaring. You need a craft capable of carrying more than a single person. A lasting population cannot be founded by one traveller. People must arrive in groups large enough to survive, find partners, share knowledge, care for children, gather food, and recover from accidents or illness. That means the vessel may need to carry families, tools, food, water, and perhaps fire or the means to make it. The logistical challenge is easy to underestimate. You are not packing for an afternoon outing. There is no convenient shop on the far shore. Anything forgotten remains forgotten. Fresh water matters most. Salt water surrounds you, beautifully useless for drinking. Containers may be made from bark, gourds, shells, animal skins, bamboo, or other available materials, depending on where you depart. Food must survive heat and spray. Tools must remain accessible. Even a short voyage becomes a small exercise in organisation. Someone has to decide who boards. Someone has to distribute weight. Someone has to keep children calm. Someone has to watch the direction of travel. Ancient migration suddenly feels less like a heroic silhouette against a sunset, and more like a crowded family trip with extremely serious consequences. Humanity has always travelled with practical complications. The craft itself remains invisible to archaeology. Wood decays, plant fibre disappears, bamboo breaks apart, reeds rot. Yet models of prehistoric crossing suggest that surprisingly simple rafts can be capable of substantial travel when carefully built and properly handled. You run your fingers along a bundle of poles tied tightly together. The fibre is coarse. Resin or plant material may reinforce certain joins. The deck sits low in the water. It does not look elegant. Elegance is optional. Buoyancy is not. A wider platform offers stability. Several people can paddle. Supplies can be kept above the wettest part of the craft. The key question is control. Can you steer? Can you resist the current? Can you maintain a useful direction long enough to reach land-ocean drift experiments? And computer modelling performed by modern researchers suggest that the currents between the islands and Sahul can make some routes more favourable than others. Certain departure points increase the chance of reaching land, while others can carry travellers badly off course. Ancient people do not have computer models. They have experience. A floating leaf reveals direction. A line of foam marks movement. Repeated observations show when tides change. Clouds collect differently above high islands. Birds move between feeding areas and roosts. The sea offers clues, although it does not arrange them politely. You have to learn which ones matter. Two broad migration pathways into Sahul are often discussed. One possible northern route passes through islands toward New Guinea. Another more southern route may lead through the islands of what is now eastern Indonesia toward northwestern Australia. Both require deliberate water crossings. Both involve difficult channels. Scholars argue over which route is more likely to have carried the earliest major population movement. The northern path may offer more visible island stepping stones. The southern path may provide favourable currents in certain conditions. Archaeological discoveries on both sides keep the debate alive. Historians still argue whether the first successful arrivals in Sahul represent a small number of fortunate crossings or a much more organised pattern of repeated voyages. Population studies suggest that accidental arrival by just a handful of people may not be enough to explain successful long-term settlement. You need demographic resilience. That phrase sounds very scholarly. On the beach, it means enough people survive to create a community. One scandalous aside, at least from the point of view of old-fashioned assumptions about prehistory, is how badly the evidence embarrasses the image of ancient humans as timid wanderers afraid of deep water. Reaching Sahul requires people to deal with challenges that many modern travellers would prefer to solve with an engine, satellite navigation, weather radar, and a life jacket. These travellers have none of those. They go anyway. The decision may not feel dramatic to them. If maritime skill is already normal within their communities, the journey might simply be understood as difficult but possible. You hear the low slap of water against the raft. A child shifts position. Someone points toward a bank of cloud. Another person adjusts a bundle of food. The sun rises higher. Land behind you shrinks, then disappears. For a while there is nothing except moving blue water. Your senses become unusually alert. The smell of damp wood, the sting of salt, the warmth of sunlight on your shoulders, the repeated dip of paddles. A seabird circles, then heads in one direction. You watch it. Perhaps it means land. Perhaps it means nothing. No clue is perfect. Navigation is a collection of probabilities. The ability to survive uncertainty may be as important as the ability to build a raft. Hours pass. Clouds thicken in one part of the horizon. Certain cloud formations can indicate land because air behaves differently above elevated terrain. Reflected light from lagoons or reefs can also affect the appearance of the sky. Experienced navigators in much later traditional societies become skilled at reading such signals. It is possible that ancient voyagers used similar observations, although the details cannot be known. Then the colour of the water changes. You notice floating leaves. A branch passes. Bird calls become more frequent. The smell of vegetation reaches you faintly. The ocean is beginning to give away the presence of land. Eventually a dark line appears. It grows. The line becomes hills. Hills become trees. You're looking at Sahul. Landing does not mean the difficulty ends. The shoreline may be muddy, rocky, mangrove-covered, or exposed to surf. Fresh water must be located quickly. Unknown animals move through the vegetation. Plant foods need to be tested or recognized. Still, the continent offers enormous opportunities. Sahul contains environments ranging from tropical forests and savannas to deserts, high mountains, wetlands, and cool southern regions. The people arriving at its northern edges gradually encounter an astonishing variety of landscapes. They also encounter animals found nowhere else. Giant marsupials roam parts of the continent. Large, flightless birds inhabit open country. Kangaroos, wallabies, wombat relatives, and many other unfamiliar creatures fill ecological roles that might seem strange to newcomers. There are no guidebooks. Observation becomes survival. The coast provides one of the safest initial environments because marine resources are familiar. Shellfish, fish, turtles, and coastal plants can support communities while people learn the interior. But humans do not remain confined to beaches. Over generations, they spread. The speed and routes of that spread remain subjects of research. Archaeological sites appear far inland, showing that people adapt quickly to environments dramatically different from tropical island shores. Cold uplands, dry plains, river systems, woodlands. Each landscape requires new knowledge. Fire becomes especially important. Humans use it for warmth, cooking, protection, hunting, and landscape management over immense periods. Aboriginal Australian societies developed detailed ecological practices shaped by local environments. The earlier settlers are not simply surviving. They are learning a continent. Records confirm through archaeology that people occupied northern Australia during a period when sea level, climate, and ecosystems are very different from those of the present day. One of the most discussed sites, Majed Beeb in northern Australia, contains evidence interpreted as human activity dating to roughly 65,000 years ago. That early date remains the subject of scholarly discussion, particularly concerning chronology and interpretation. Arguments split along questions of dating methods, sediment movement, and how confidently artifacts can be associated with the oldest layers. Yet whether settlement begins somewhat earlier or somewhat later, the overall achievement remains immense. Humans crossed deep water into Sahul tens of thousands of years before written history. You picture the first nights near an unfamiliar coast. A fire burns under a dark sky. The constellations look subtly different. The smell of unfamiliar plants drifts through camp. Tools lie close at hand. Children sleep near adults. The sea murmurs somewhere beyond the trees. There may be relief in simply being alive. No one knows the continent's size. No one knows how far the plains extend. No one knows that descendants of these travellers will create cultures enduring across tens of thousands of years. For now, there is only the immediate world, water, food, fire, family, a new stretch of land, and the quiet knowledge that a sea wide enough to hide the horizon has been crossed successfully. You crouch beside a fallen tree at the edge of a quiet inlet, and for the first time the question is not whether water can be crossed, but how a craft can be made better. The trunk is heavy, rough, and still damp beneath your hands. Bark catches against your palm. Small insects disappear into cracks in the wood. The air smells of resin, mud, and smoke from a nearby fire. Around you lie stone tools, lengths of vine, sharpened stakes, and piles of plant fibre. Nothing here looks like a shipyard. Yet this is where shipbuilding begins, not with grand vessels, polished hulls, or carved figureheads, but with a simple problem. How do you make floating wood obey you? A log by itself is buoyant, but unstable. It rolls, it drifts sideways. It can carry weight, but not always safely. Tie several logs together and the platform becomes wider. Add cross pieces and it becomes stronger. Lash the structure tightly and people can sit, kneel, paddle, and carry supplies without constantly wondering whether the entire arrangement will come apart. That is already engineering. The word does not exist yet. The knowledge does. You pull a length of twisted fibre between your hands. It seems ordinary, but cordage may be one of the most important technologies in the early boat building. Without rope, many simple craft are difficult to assemble. With rope, you can bind logs, secure bundles of reeds, fasten a steering paddle, tie supplies in place, repair breaks, and strengthen weak joints. Plant fibre can come from bark, grasses, vines, leaves, or other local materials. The exact source varies by region, but the basic principle remains wonderfully useful. Twist fibres together, twist those strands together again. Strength emerges from many weak pieces working as one. It is difficult not to admire the elegance. You do not need metal nails. You need patience. A mainstream archaeological fact helps reveal how old this kind of skill may be. Direct evidence for prehistoric boats is rare because wood and fibre decay, but preserved wooden tools from later prehistoric periods show that people become highly capable at shaping timber long before written records describe boat construction. Some of the oldest surviving watercraft are dugout canoes. A dugout begins with a single tree trunk. The idea sounds straightforward until you actually imagine the labour. You cannot simply hollow a tree with a convenient steel axe. You work with stone. The process may begin by selecting a straight trunk with suitable wood. The tree is felled or an already fallen trunk is chosen. Fire may help soften or remove interior material. Stone adzes and axes chop, scrape, and shape the surface. Little by little, the centre becomes hollow. The work is slow. Wood chips accumulate around your feet. Your shoulders ache. The tool edge dulls and needs resharpening. Then someone notices that one side is thinner than the other, which is exactly the sort of discovery that makes any large project more enjoyable. You scrape again. A successful dugout must balance several demands. The walls need to be thin enough to reduce weight, but thick enough to remain strong. The bottom should sit steadily in the water. The ends may be shaped to reduce resistance. The interior must hold people and supplies. A crack can ruin days or weeks of labour. Fire is both useful and dangerous. Controlled burning can help hollow the trunk, but too much heat weakens the wood. You begin to appreciate why boat building becomes specialised knowledge. A good craft is not simply carved, it is judged. Experienced makers tap the hull, examine grain, test thickness, and recognise weaknesses before launching. Much of this knowledge would be transmitted by demonstration. Younger people watch older builders. Hands guide hands. Mistakes become lessons. Certain tree species are preferred. Certain cutting angles work better. Certain fibres tighten when wet, others stretch or rot. The craft gradually becomes a collection of local knowledge disguised as a piece of wood. Not every environment offers large trees. Where reeds grow abundantly, people can make boats from bundles of stalks tied together. Reed craft can be surprisingly strong. Individual stems are light and fragile, but tightly packed bundles create buoyancy. Several bundles can be shaped into a broad hull. Curved ends help keep waves from washing directly over the front. The finished boat may look soft compared with carved timber, yet it can carry substantial weight. Your fingers press into the dried reeds. They rustle quietly. The smell is grassy and warm. A repair can be made by adding fresh bundles. The entire craft can be constructed with tools far simpler than those required to hollow a large tree. This makes reed boats especially attractive in wetlands, river deltas, lake regions, and treeless environments. There is no single prehistoric boat. There are many solutions. A bark canoe offers another approach. Instead of carving a whole trunk, you remove broad sheets of bark from a suitable tree, shape them, and fasten the edges. Frames or ribs can help hold the hull open. Resin or other natural substances may seal seams. The result can be light enough to carry over land. That matters enormously in places filled with rivers, lakes, and short stretches of forest between waterways. A heavy dugout is wonderfully stable until you need to drag it 3 kilometers uphill. At that moment, light bark begins to seem rather brilliant. Portability changes travel. A group can move along one river, lift the canoe onto shoulders, cross a divide, and launch into another drainage system. Waterways become linked. The landscape begins to function like a network. A curious footnote is that some traditional boat building techniques use almost no permanent rigid fasteners at all. Planks, ribs, and other components can be sewn or lashed together with fibre. To a modern eye, this may look less secure than nails. In practice, flexible joints can absorb movement. A vessel at sea bends. Waves twist the hull. Rigid construction is not always an advantage. A tightly lashed structure can flex without breaking. The boat moves with the water rather than fighting every force. This principle appears in many later maritime traditions, and it may preserve very old technological ideas. You can feel the logic in your hands. Pull too tightly in one place and the material may split. Leave a joint loose and the hull leaks or shifts. The builder searches for balance. The same is true when making paddles. A paddle seems simple until you depend on it. The blade must move enough water to propel the craft. The shaft must be strong but manageable. The grip must not exhaust the hands. A poorly shaped paddle wastes energy with every stroke. Repeated use encourages refinement. You shave the blade thinner, you alter its width, you smooth the handle where it rubs against the palm. Perhaps different paddles emerge for different tasks. A short paddle works well in narrow water. A longer steering paddle gives a leverage at the rear. Poles help in shallow rivers. Technology grows from discomfort as often as inspiration. If something hurts every day, eventually someone tries to improve it. One scandalous aside in the story of prehistoric invention is how often scholars once underestimated technologies made from perishable materials. Stone survives, so stone dominates archaeological collections. Wood does not survive nearly as well. Fibre rarely survives. Bark usually disappears. This creates a misleading picture. Imagine judging modern civilization 50,000 years from now using only the objects made of rock. You might conclude that office workers lived very strangely. Archaeologists know this problem well. The surviving record is biased toward durable materials, so researchers use indirect clues. Stone tools can show wear from woodworking. Cut marks reveal shaping techniques. Resins and plant remains occasionally survive in protected conditions. Ancient shorelines reveal occupation sites, and in rare waterlogged environments, wooden objects remain preserved long enough to astonish everyone who finds them. Records confirm that prehistoric people possess sophisticated woodworking skills in many regions long before the earliest written descriptions of boats. A famous example comes from Central Europe, where preserved wooden spears more than 300,000 years old demonstrate remarkable control over timber shaping. They are not boats, but they prove something important. Early humans can select wood, shape it carefully, balance it, and manufacture large wooden objects with deliberate design. If such skill is applied to hunting weapons, it is entirely plausible that floating craft receive equally thoughtful attention where water travel matters. Still, scholars bicker over what the earliest true boats actually look like. Are they simple rafts made from available logs? Are they bundles of bamboo? Naturally buoyant and easy to lash? Do some early populations hollow trunks much earlier than surviving evidence suggests? Are skin-covered frames used in some cold environments? No agreement has been reached on which boat form appears first. There may never have been a single answer. Different landscapes likely produce different inventions. A tropical forest gives you timber. A marsh gives you reeds. A northern hunting society may have access to animal hides and flexible frames. A river delta demands something different from an exposed ocean coast. Necessity does not invent one boat. It invents a family of boats. Your mind drifts toward an experimental launch. A new craft rests half in the water. Several people stand around it, checking lashings. No written plan exists. No measurements appear on a tablet, but there is clearly a standard in everyone's mind. The hull sits too low. A bundle is moved. The balance improves. One binding looks loose. It is tightened. A paddle is passed from hand to hand. The craft is pushed farther out. Water rises around ankles, then knees. The hull begins to float. There is always a small moment of truth when weight transfers from earth to water. The boat either works or immediately teaches you what went wrong. Perhaps it tilts. Someone laughs. Perhaps someone does not laugh. Supplies are rearranged. A second attempt follows. This process is important because prehistoric technology is not static. A successful craft can be copied. A failed one can be improved. Every launch becomes an experiment. You discover that a wider beam increases stability. A raised end handles waves better. More tightly packed reeds reduce waterlogging. A certain knot holds better when wet. A particular tree cracks less during hollowing. Knowledge accumulates generation by generation. It does not require writing. It requires memory and repetition. Boat building may also change social organization. Constructing a large craft takes labor. Several people may need to cut timber, prepare fiber, gather resin, transport materials, and shape the hull. That requires cooperation. Someone coordinates, someone has expertise, someone decides when the craft is ready. A large vessel can become community property or belong to a particular family or group. The ability to build and maintain boats may create status. A skilled boat maker possesses knowledge that others depend upon, not flashy status, perhaps. Still, if the person who understands hull repair tells you not to launch today, you probably listen. The craft also changes what can be carried. A swimmer can cross water with almost nothing. A raft can carry baskets. A canoe can carry children. A larger vessel can carry food, tools, water, firewood, hunting equipment, and materials for setting up camp. Transport capacity changes migration itself. People no longer have to arrive nearly empty-handed. They can bring part of home with them. This may be one of the quietest revolutions in human history. The ocean crossing is only the visible achievement. The deeper change is logistical. A vessel turns human movement into organized relocation. You step into the completed boat. The bottom is cool beneath your feet. Wood smells faintly smoky where fire has shaped it. Plant fiber creaks under tension. A paddle rests across your knees. The craft is still primitive by any modern definition. There is no sail, no metal, no compass, no written design. Yet the boat carries generations of observation. It holds knowledge of trees, stone, knots, balance, water, weight, and weather. The builders push away from shore. The hull settles. Your paddle enters the water. For the first time, the craft does not merely float, it responds. You sit low in a small craft while the shoreline fades into a pale strip behind you, and the sea begins to look disturbingly similar in every direction. There are no road signs, no compass needle, no chart folded across your knees, no reassuring little arrow announcing that your destination's 12 kilometers ahead. Instead, you have wind against your cheek, waves beneath the hull, birds crossing the sky, clouds building in distant columns, and a lifetime of observation stored inside your memory. This is enough to begin. The ocean is not blank. It only appears blank to someone who does not know how to read it. You feel the breeze first. Wind carries direction, temperature, smell, moisture, and information about approaching weather. It pushes the craft, even when you're traveling without a sail. It changes the shape of waves. It moves clouds. It can either assist your journey or turn a reasonable crossing into several exhausting hours of paddling, so you learn its habits. Morning wind may differ from afternoon wind. A coastal breeze may flow one way during the day and another after sunset. Seasonal winds may return with such regularity that entire periods of travel become associated with particular times of year. You do not describe these patterns using atmospheric pressure. You simply know them. A certain wind means calm water near sunrise. Another brings rain. Another makes elders shake their heads and tell everyone to keep the boat on the beach. This knowledge becomes as practical as knowing which plants are edible. You raise one hand and feel the moving air against your fingers. The gesture seems almost too simple, yet direction can be felt by skin. A wet cheek makes a faint breeze easier to notice. Smoke from a fire reveals movement before departure. Leaves flutter on exposed branches. Dust, ash, and insects drift with invisible currents. The wind may be unseen, but its effects are everywhere. Once you leave land, the waves become another language. To an inexperienced traveller, waves appear chaotic. They rise, they fall, they slap the hull, they occasionally throw cold water directly into your lap, just to make sure you remain humble. But repeated exposure reveals structure. Waves often arrive in sets. Long ocean swells travel great distances from the storms that created them. Local winds may produce smaller waves on top of those deeper movements. That means the water can carry more than one pattern at once. You feel one swell lifting the boat from the side while shorter waves strike from another direction. The difference matters. A stable swell can provide orientation even when clouds hide the sky. Your body senses it through balance. You may not need to stare at the surface. The rhythm reaches your hips, shoulders, and spine. With enough experience, direction becomes something you feel. Traditional navigators in several parts of the world demonstrate how refined this skill can become. Records confirm that skilled ocean navigators have used wave direction, reflected swells, winds, stars, birds, and cloud patterns together rather than depending upon a single clue. That combination is important. No one sign is perfectly reliable. The sky can cloud over, birds can wander, currents shift. A swell may come from a distant storm unrelated to your destination. So you compare signs. If the wind suggests one direction, the swell another, and the birds a third. You do not simply choose your favourite and hope the ocean admires your confidence. You observe longer, you wait, you compare. Navigation becomes a conversation between evidence. The sun is among the clearest guides. It rises in the east and sets in the west, although the exact position shifts through the year. You do not need mathematical astronomy to notice this. You only need repeated mornings. A departure can be timed so the sun helps maintain direction. Shadows across the craft change as hours pass. At midday, the sun's height provides another clue. Then evening arrives, the sky darkens, the sea turns almost black. Stars appear. Suddenly the heavens offer hundreds of reference points. You lie back slightly and look upward. Certain stars rise from familiar parts of the horizon. Others travel across the sky in recognizable arcs. Some remain visible only during particular seasons. A star that rises above the direction of your destination can serve as a temporary guide. As it climbs too high to remain useful, another star can take its place. The sky becomes a sequence, not a map drawn on paper, a map performed through time. You learn where stars appear, how there's a move, and which ones correspond with familiar directions. The knowledge must be memorized. This is not easy. It may be taught through repeated voyages, stories, chants, gestures, or carefully structured lessons. You do not simply memorize isolated lights. You remember relationships. This star rises near that island. That group appears during a particular season. Another star sits above the course home. Clouds add another layer. A cloud over the open sea may seem meaningless, but islands affect air. High land pushes moist air upward. Vegetation releases moisture. Warm surfaces change local conditions. Clouds can gather repeatedly above islands even when the island itself remains too distant to see. So you study the horizon. A fixed cloud bank draws attention. One cloud remains while others drift. Its base may look darker. Its shape changes more slowly than the surrounding sky. Perhaps land sits beneath it. You alter course. Reflected light can also reveal hidden features. A shallow lagoon may cast a pale green tint beneath clouds. Dark vegetation can produce a different tone. These effects are subtle. To modern eyes, they may be almost invisible. To someone whose safety depends on them, subtlety becomes worth noticing. The horizon is no longer an empty boundary. It is full of hints. Birds provide some of the most useful moving clues. You watch them at dawn. Some species spend the night on land and fly outward to feed. Others return toward shore in the evening. Their direction can suggest where land lies. A group of birds flying purposefully at sunset is very different from a lone bird wandering over open water. You learn species as carefully as you learn stars. Oddly enough, frigate birds become especially interesting because they generally avoid settling on the ocean surface. Their feathers are poorly suited to prolonged water contact, so they often return to land to rest. Seeing one far offshore can therefore suggest that land may lie within flying range. Of course, the bird does not politely circle above your boat and point with one wing. You still have to interpret its behaviour. Terns, boobies, Noddies, and other seabirds can provide different clues depending on region, feeding habits, and time of day. A navigator must know more than the word bird. You know which bird. You know what it usually does. You know whether its behaviour today is ordinary. That level of attention comes only from familiarity. Marine animals can offer information too. Fish species change as you approach reefs. Sea turtles may follow recurring routes. Insects carried offshore can suggest nearby land. Floating seeds, leaves, branches, and grass become increasingly common near some coastlines. You reach over and lift a green leaf from the water. It is fresh. That matters. A fresh leaf has probably not spent many days drifting across open ocean. A dry branch covered in marine growth tells a different story. Even debris has age. Even age carries direction. Then there is smell. This is one of the most easily overlooked senses in modern navigation. You close your eyes. The air over open ocean smells of salt and water, but near land, new scents may appear. Wet soil, flowers, smoke, bird colonies, decaying vegetation, forest resin. Certain islands can announce themselves through scent before their shapes become clear. Your nose becomes part of the navigational toolkit. So does hearing. At night, when vision is limited, sound travels over water. Surf breaking against a reef can sometimes be heard before the reef is visible. Bird colonies create distant noise. Waves striking cliffs produce a rhythm different from waves breaking on an open beach. You listen into darkness. The sea does not become less dangerous, it becomes less anonymous. Currents present a more difficult challenge. Unlike wind, they may not be obvious from the surface. You can point the craft directly toward a destination and still drift sideways. Experienced travellers recognize this through comparison with stars, sun, swell, or visible land. If your destination slowly moves across the horizon, instead of remaining in the expected position, the current is carrying you away. You compensate. You aim slightly to one side. This is not a mistake. It is deliberate correction. You travel at an angle so the water pushes you toward the place you actually want to reach. The idea is simple. Learning the correct angle is not. It requires experience with that particular channel, tide, wind, and season. Knowledge becomes local. A person skilled in one stretch of sea may not automatically understand another. Every passage has its personality. Some currents reverse with tides, others flow consistently. Some accelerate between islands where water is squeezed through narrow channels. A calm-looking surface can hide enormous movement underneath. Scholars bicker over how much systematic celestial navigation prehistoric voyagers used during the earliest periods of open water travel. Historians still argue whether formal star paths developed very early, or whether ancient travellers depend more heavily on coastlines, swells, winds, birds, and short-distance visual cues. The problem is familiar. Navigation knowledge leaves almost no physical remains. A stone tool can survive, a remembered star course cannot. The evidence is carried in minds. When the people who hold that knowledge disappear, the technique can vanish almost completely. This makes prehistoric navigation especially difficult to reconstruct. Researchers can study later traditional navigators. They can model winds and currents. They can test reconstructed craft. They can examine which islands are visible from which points. But they cannot sit beside the first ocean travellers and ask what they are thinking. The silence leaves room for debate. Still, one conclusion feels difficult to avoid. People who repeatedly travel across water become expert observers. You have to. Mistakes on land may cost time. Mistakes at sea can remove the destination entirely. Memory, therefore, becomes precise. You remember the shape of a cloud over a certain island. You remember how a swell feels when returning home. You remember where the evening birds fly. You remember which star rises over a particular headland. Young travellers sit beside experienced ones and absorb these details. Perhaps lessons begin on shore. Someone draws lines in sand. A hand points towards sunrise. A shell marks an island. Pebbles represent stars. Then the lesson moves onto water, where everything becomes harder because the world refuses to remain still. The boat rises beneath you. Wind changes. Cloud hides the star you were following. Your teacher does not panic. That may be the most important lesson of all. You use another clue. A swell still moves beneath the hull. Birds are returning in one direction. The air carries the faint scent of damp earth. You continue. Gradually, darkness thins. Morning light spreads across the horizon. A low shape appears beneath a bank of cloud. At first it could be mist. Then the shape holds. The boat rises on a swell, and the outline becomes clearer. Trees, a ridge, land. You adjust your direction with a few steady strokes. There is no instrument to congratulate you, no bell rings, no marker announces successful navigation. The proof simply grows larger in front of you. The sea has been read correctly, and for a person who knows its signs, the vast water around you is no longer empty at all. You wake to the sound of woodworking beside a tropical shore. A stone adze strikes timber with a steady hollow rhythm. Chips scatter over packed earth. Nearby, someone twists plant fibre into cord while another person smooths the edge of a long wooden plank. Children move between houses raised above damp ground. Dogs bark somewhere beyond the palms, and smoke carries the scent of cooking fish into the humid morning air. Along the beach, several canoes wait above the tide line. These are not improvised platforms made simply to survive one crossing. They belong to a maritime culture. Across the islands of Southeast Asia, communities connected with the Austronesian expansion develop ways of life in which boats, farming, language, trade, and navigation become closely intertwined. Beginning several thousand years ago, Austronesian-speaking peoples spread from regions around Taiwan and the northern Philippines through much of island Southeast Asia, and eventually across an extraordinary portion of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The movement is one of the widest human dispersals in history. Yet standing here, it feels local. Someone is repairing a hull. Someone is carrying baskets toward the beach. Someone is checking the weather. Grand historical transformations usually begin with people doing ordinary things. The canoe in front of you is narrow. By itself, that could make it unstable. So a long wooden float is attached parallel to the hull by crossbeams. This is an outrigger. You press your hand against one of the connecting poles and feel how cleverly the system works. The main hull can remain slim and efficient while the outrigger resists rolling. A narrow canoe moves quickly through water. A stabilizing float makes that speed safer. It is an elegant answer to a basic problem. If a broad hull creates stability through width, an outrigger creates stability through geometry. The ocean does not care which method you choose. It merely tests whether the boat remains upright. In different regions, sailors develop single outriggers, double outriggers, larger canoes, and eventually vessels capable of carrying considerable numbers of people and cargo. Boat building becomes specialized. A builder must understand timber. Some woods are too heavy. Others split easily. Certain trees provide strong trunks. Others offer flexible components. The grain matters. The shape of the tree itself may influence the final vessel. You can hear experience in the way builders discuss materials. They do not need written engineering manuals. They know which wood bends. They know which fibre survives salt water. They know how tightly a lashing should be pulled. They know when a hull has been shaped incorrectly just by looking along its length. The canoe is not assembled with iron nails. Pieces may be joined using wooden fittings, dowels, lashings, and carefully shaped connections. In some boat-building traditions, planks are fitted together through systems that allow the hull a degree of flexibility. This matters in rough water. A rigid vessel absorbs every force. A flexible vessel can move slightly with the sea. You climb carefully into one of the canoes. The hull shifts beneath you. The outrigger settles against the surface. Suddenly the strange shape makes perfect sense. Balance comes easily. The boat feels light. A paddle enters the water with little resistance. Along many island coastlines, this kind of craft transforms daily life. Fishing grounds become easier to reach. Neighbouring communities become regular destinations. Goods can move between islands. Marriage partners can travel. Messages can travel. Ideas travel with them. The sea becomes less a dividing line and more a road. Records confirm through linguistics, archaeology, and genetics that Austronesian-speaking communities expand through the Philippines and much of Indonesia during the late Neolithic period, carrying combinations of farming practices, technologies, domesticated animals, pottery traditions, and maritime knowledge. Rice and millet are important in some regions. Elsewhere, tropical crops become more useful. People carry pigs, dogs, and chickens across parts of the island world. The package is never identical everywhere. Local environments reshape it. A farming tradition suited to one island may work poorly on another, so communities adapt. This flexibility helps explain the scale of expansion. Imagine arriving on a small tropical island where flat agricultural land is limited. A stubborn farmer could spend years complaining about the soil. A practical one changes crops. Taro grows well in wet ground. Yams tolerate other conditions. Breadfruit becomes valuable in some areas, and coconut palms provide food, liquid, fibre, oil, and building material. Bananas thrive in warm climates. Plants become travellers too. The canoe carries landscapes in miniature, seeds, cuttings, tubers, saplings. A voyage may transport not only people but the ingredients of future villages. This makes planned migration very different from accidental drift. A family intending to settle somewhere new needs more than food for the journey. It needs food for years to come. Useful plants must survive transport. Animals must arrive alive. Tools must be protected from salt. Fresh water must be carried. Children must be cared for. A successful migration canoe is part vessel, part pantry, part garden centre, and part extremely crowded family vehicle. There is very little room for unnecessary luggage. You can imagine arguments over what deserves space, an extra adds, more drinking water. Another basket of tubers, the pig that refuses to remain where it was placed. Prehistoric voyaging may be impressive, but it is unlikely to be serene every minute. A curious footnote concerns chickens. As Austronesian communities move through the island world, domesticated chickens travel with them and eventually spread far beyond their original range. Their bones, genes, and linguistic names have become clues in reconstructing ancient migration. A chicken does not appear to be a historical document, yet thousands of years later, its descendants can help reveal where people travelled. Pigs provide similar evidence, so do plants. The movement of crops and animals creates a biological trail across the ocean. Language creates another. Austronesian languages eventually spread across an enormous geographical area, from Madagascar off the coast of Africa to islands deep in the Pacific. Thousands of kilometres separate these communities, yet related words preserve hints of shared ancestry. Terms for body parts, numbers, family relationships, boats, winds, and everyday objects can retain similarities across distant languages. You listen to voices on the beach and imagine words moving with every canoe. A term spoken here may change slightly on another island. Generations pass, pronunciation shifts, meanings drift, new vocabulary appears, but traces of relationship remain. Languages behave almost like migrating populations themselves. They divide, they mix, they adapt, they remember. The the Philippines becomes a particularly important zone of movement. Islands sit close enough for regular crossings, yet far enough apart to encourage local identities. Communities develop their own dialects and customs while remaining tied into broader maritime networks. From here, migration continues southward and eastward. Borneo, Sulawesi, the Moluccas, Timor, countless smaller islands. Each region adds new conditions. Volcanic islands can offer rich soils. Coral islands may have little fresh water. Mountainous islands create sharply different environments within short distances. Some places are already inhabited by populations whose ancestors arrived far earlier. Contact follows. This is crucial. Austronesian expansion is not a story of people entering empty space. Across much of island Southeast Asia and near Oceania, newcomers encounter established communities. They exchange goods. They marry. They compete. They borrow technologies. They share words. They influence one another genetically and culturally. Human history rarely follows the neat arrows drawn on maps. Those arrows make migration look like one population simply replaces another. Reality is much messier and far more interesting. You step into a village where pottery styles suggest outside connections, while local hunting methods belong to older traditions. A canoe design contains features learned from neighbouring sailors. A family speaks a language belonging to one broad linguistic family while carrying ancestry from several populations. Culture blends without asking historians for permission. Scholars bicker over exactly how the Austronesian expansion unfolds. One influential model emphasises a movement beginning around Taiwan and spreading south through the Philippines, followed by rapid dispersal through the island world. Other researchers stress that migration involves substantial mixing with existing populations, and that cultural change cannot be explained by a simple wave of replacement. Arguments split along questions of archaeology, genetics, linguistics, chronology, and how much local innovation occurs independently. No agreement has been reached on a single perfectly tidy model. The evidence instead suggests motion combined with interaction. People move, people meet, people change one another. The boats help make this possible. Maritime mobility means contact does not end once a settlement is founded. You can return. That simple ability alters everything. A community on one island does not need to become isolated. Canoes allow relatives to remain connected across channels. Marriage ties stretch between villages. Specialized resources circulate. A fine stone suitable for tools may come from one island. Decorative shell may come from another. Clay for pottery may be local. While certain styles arrive through exchange, knowledge travels faster than populations. Someone visits another community and sees a better fishing hook. Someone learns a new knot. Someone tastes an unfamiliar crop. Someone notices a more efficient sail. The idea returns home. Technology spreads without requiring entire villages to move. The sail becomes especially important. Paddling is reliable, but human muscle has limits. Wind offers enormous energy if you can control it. Early Austronesian sailors developed sailing traditions that eventually become highly sophisticated. A sail converts moving air into motion across water. The principle sounds simple. Using it well is not. Sail shape matters. Mast placement matters. Hull balance matters. Wind direction matters. A poorly handled sail can overturn a canoe or tear equipment apart. A well-handled sail extends range dramatically. You sit beneath woven material stretched against the wind. The canoe begins to accelerate. Water whispers along the hull. The paddle is no longer the main source of propulsion. The atmosphere itself pulls you forward. Sailing changes the scale of possible movement. A journey that demands exhausting paddling can become manageable. Cargo capacity becomes more useful because travellers do not need to spend every moment providing propulsion. Longer crossings become practical. Routes can be repeated more efficiently, but sails do not remove danger. Strong wind can become destructive. Calm weather can leave a vessel nearly motionless. A sailor must understand when to raise sail, reduce sail, or lower it entirely. Weather knowledge becomes inseparable from navigation. Seasonal wind systems influence when voyages are attempted. In parts of Southeast Asia, monsoon patterns create broad changes in prevailing winds during the year. Travel in one direction may be easier during one season. The return journey may become easier months later when winds shift. Trade begins to follow the breathing rhythm of the atmosphere. You can imagine a shoreline community watching the season approach. Cloud patterns change, humidity shifts, wind settles into a familiar direction. Boats are repaired, supplies are gathered. People know that the travelling period is opening. No calendar hangs on the wall. The environment announces it. One mainstream historical fact emerges with remarkable clarity by several thousand years ago. Austronesian-speaking sailors are moving through enormous sections of the maritime world, creating networks that connect communities across distances unprecedented for many earlier coastal populations. The achievement comes from no single invention. It depends on a system. Boats, sails, navigation, food production, social networks, shared knowledge, the ability to establish settlements and remain connected across water. Remove any one piece and expansion becomes harder. Together they create maritime societies capable of treating islands not as isolated dots, but as parts of a connected world. You stand again on the beach as evening approaches. Canoes return from fishing. One arrives carrying visitors. Another is pulled above the tide. A sail is folded. Fibre ropes are hung to dry. Someone examines a damaged outrigger connection and begins repairing it before darkness arrives. The sounds are domestic. Wood scraping, children laughing, a paddle dropped onto sand, waves moving over coral fragments. Nothing about the scene announces conquest of an ocean. That is precisely what makes it powerful. Seafaring has become ordinary. The canoe is no longer an emergency solution to water. It is transportation. It is livelihood. It is communication. It is inheritance. And when a society begins to raise children who regard the sea as familiar territory, the horizon stops looking like an ending. It begins to look like another route. You leave the crowded island chains behind and enter a different kind of ocean. The distances widen. Land no longer appears every few hours as a comforting green ridge on the horizon. Instead, there are long stretches where the sea dominates everything. The sky feels larger. The swell seems slower and deeper. Even the sound of the water changes, becoming less like the chatter of a coastal passage and more like a steady pulse beneath the hull. This is remote Oceania. The name sounds almost poetic, but it describes a very real geographical threshold. Near Oceania includes islands such as New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, and the Solomon Islands, where humans have lived for tens of thousands of years. Remote Oceania begins farther east, beyond substantial open water gaps that demand more ambitious voyages. To enter this region, people must do more than move between familiar neighbouring islands. They must search. They must leave land without knowing exactly when another shore will appear, around 3,500 years ago. Communities associated with what archaeologists call the Lapita cultural tradition begin expanding eastward from the region around the Bismarck Archipelago. Their presence is recognizable partly through pottery. You can hold one of these vessels in your hands. The clay surface is firm and slightly rough. Across it runs an intricate pattern made with small repeated impressions. Triangles, curves, lines, and geometric arrangements cover parts of the vessel. The decoration is distinctive. It is made using toothed tools pressed into wet clay before firing. These pots become some of the clearest archaeological markers of the people, moving rapidly through the Western Pacific. A mainstream historical fact stands out here. Lapita-associated communities settle islands that had never previously supported permanent human populations. eventually reaching places including Tonga and Samoa. This is not an accidental drift into one isolated island. It is a broad pattern of colonization. Within only a few centuries, people spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. That speed is remarkable. You stand on a beach while preparations unfold. This voyage feels different from an ordinary fishing trip. Food is packed carefully. Water is secured. Useful plants are prepared for transport. Tools are wrapped. Perhaps pigs, dogs, or chickens are brought aboard, depending on the voyage and community. The vessel has to support not merely travellers, but the beginnings of a settlement. You are carrying a future village across the sea. There is taro. There may be yam. There are coconuts. There are tools for cutting wood and clearing ground. There are fishing implements. There are containers. There are ornaments. There are memories of how houses should be built and gardens organised. A settlement begins long before the new island is reached. It begins with deciding what to take. That decision reveals confidence. You do not pack planting material unless you expect to find land. You do not transport domestic animals unless you believe there will be somewhere to release or manage them. You do not carry families into deep water casually. The voyage may still fail, but it is planned. The vessel itself is almost certainly more capable than a simple raft. No intact Lapita ocean-going canoe survives for archaeologists to examine, so exact forms remain uncertain. Yet later, Pacific boat-building traditions, linguistic evidence, and the distances involved suggest sophisticated sailing craft, probably including outrigger or double-hold arrangements in different contexts. You step aboard. The hull sits firmly in the water. A woven sail waits to catch the wind. Cargo is placed to maintain balance. People sit according to tasks. The shore remains close enough to smell wood smoke. Then the sail fills. The canoe begins moving. The village shrinks. Soon the familiar coastline becomes a dark line. Then it is gone. You are now travelling into an ocean where the destination may be invisible. This creates one of the central mysteries of Pacific settlement. How do you find islands scattered across such enormous distances? Some islands are high and mountainous. They can be detected from far away through cloud formations, birds, and other signs. Others are low coral islands that barely rise above the sea. Finding those is far more difficult. A navigator must create a wide target out of a tiny one. One way to do this is by understanding what might be called an island's expanded presence. Land itself may be small, but its signs extend outward. Birds fly far from nesting sites. Clouds form above lagoons or high ground. Reflected light changes beneath cloud bases. Floating vegetation drifts outward. Wave patterns bend around islands and reefs. The island influences an area far larger than its coastline. You search not only for land, you search for its fingerprints. The voyage may include deliberate exploration. Instead of loading an entire community immediately, a smaller crew can search first. They travel outward. If they find nothing, they return. If they discover an island, they memorize the route. Then a larger migration can follow. This possibility changes the character of expansion. Exploration becomes a profession of risk. You imagine being part of a scouting voyage. There is no guarantee of success. You leave with enough food and water to travel for days. You maintain a course using sun, stars, swells, and wind. At intervals, someone scans the horizon. Another watches birds. Everyone notices clouds. The ocean becomes mentally exhausting because attention cannot relax completely. Then, late in the day, a bird flies past. It is not wandering. It moves with purpose. Another follows. The navigator changes direction slightly. Toward evening, the birds continue ahead. Perhaps they are returning to land. The crew follows. Darkness comes. You sleep in turns. The boat rises and falls. At dawn, a pale bank of cloud sits ahead. Underneath it appears a line that does not move. Land. Relief spreads quietly through the crew. No one needs to explain it. The new island must now be evaluated. Finding land is not the same as finding a good home. Fresh water comes first. A lush island may have streams. A low coral island may depend on rainfall, groundwater lenses, or carefully managed wells. The shore must provide a safe landing. Reefs can offer rich fishing but dangerous surf. Soils must support useful plants. Storm exposure matters. A beautiful island without reliable water is not particularly beautiful after a few thirsty days. You walk inland. The ground feels unfamiliar beneath your feet. Birds show little fear because they have never encountered humans. This can make hunting surprisingly easy. Shellfish gather thickly in some lagoons. Fish crowd reefs. Seabirds nest in enormous colonies. At first, the island may seem impossibly generous, but abundance can disappear quickly. Human settlement changes ecosystems. Bird populations decline. Forests are cleared. Introduced animals disturb nests and vegetation. Gardens replace wild plant communities. The island becomes a human landscape. A curious footnote lies in the pottery itself. Lapita ceramics appear at many settlement sites, but in parts of the Pacific the elaborate decorated tradition eventually fades. Pottery becomes simpler in some areas and disappears entirely in others. This is strange at first. Why would a useful technology vanish? The answer may involve local resources, changing cooking methods, transport costs, or shifting cultural preferences. Clay suitable for pottery is not equally available on every island. Moving heavy, fragile pots by canoe is also inconvenient. A ceramic jar is useful right up until a wave drops it against another ceramic jar. Then you have archaeology. Settlement creates new problems. You need houses. Lapita communities often establish villages near coasts or lagoons, places that provide fishing access and convenient canoe landings. Some houses may stand on posts, particularly in wet coastal areas. Wooden structures leave limited traces, but post holes and settlement patterns provide clues. You walk through such a village in the evening. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Fish roast over heat. Children carry shells. A canoe is being repaired near the water. Someone shapes an adze. Another person works on a decorated pot. The island may have been unknown to human beings only a generation earlier. Now it has paths, gardens, names, stories. This transformation happens repeatedly. New Caledonia, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa. Each group of islands becomes part of a widening network. The ocean between them remains dangerous, but it no longer produces isolation automatically. Voyages continue. People exchange stone, shell, pottery, ornaments, marriage partners, and information. Certain materials reveal the reach of these connections. Obsidian is especially useful to archaeologists because volcanic glass can often be traced chemically to particular geological sources. A fragment found far from its original volcano indicates movement. The object may have passed through many hands. Its route may involve several islands. Yet the stone remembers where it formed. In this way, a small dark flake becomes evidence of a large human network. Records confirm that materials circulate over impressive distances within Lapita exchange systems. This tells you that settlers do not simply arrive and become forgotten. Connections remain active. Canoes travel back and forth. Knowledge about newly discovered islands can return westward. People can relocate again. A settlement is a node rather than an ending. This helps reduce risk. If one island suffers drought, storm damage, or crop failure, relatives elsewhere may provide support. Social relationships become part of survival at sea. You're safer when you know people across the horizon. Kinship stretches over water. Perhaps a young person grows up hearing names of islands never personally visited. An aunt lives there. A marriage partner came from there. A valuable stone originates there. A particular style of ornament is associated with another community. The mental map becomes enormous. You may not know every island firsthand, but you know they exist. That changes exploration. Unknown water is bordered by known possibilities. Tonga offers an especially striking example. Lapita settlers arrived there roughly 3,000 years ago, establishing communities across an island group that lies deep within remote Oceania. Samoa is settled around a similar broad period. These islands later become important centres of Pacific cultural development, but at first they are frontier settlements. You can imagine the psychological adjustment. There is no larger human population farther east that you know about. The western islands contain ancestral homes. The route back is long. The ocean surrounding you seems endless. Still, gardens grow, children are born. Local fishing grounds become familiar. A generation raised here no longer thinks of the island as new. It is simply home. Historians still argue whether Lapita expansion is driven mainly by population growth, social competition, opportunities for new land, trade ambitions, or a cultural preference for exploration. Scholars bicker over how frequently pioneer crews intentionally sail into unknown waters and how often discovery results from voyages with other goals. There is no single motive that explains every departure. Some settlers may seek land, some may seek resources, some may leave because of conflict, some may follow relatives, and some, surely are simply curious. Curiosity is difficult to identify in pottery fragments, but humans have always wondered what lies beyond the visible edge. The remarkable part is not merely that people wonder, it is that they build vessels capable of finding out. You stand on a Tongan shore as night settles over the lagoon. The sea is dark beyond the reef. Stars appear one by one. A canoe rests above the high water line, its sail folded, its hull scratched from repeated use. Across the village, food is being shared. A dog moves near the fire. Someone is telling a story. The island no longer feels remote to the people living here. Remote is a word used by someone standing somewhere else. To you, this is the centre. The roots radiating outward are known through memory, wind, stars, family, and experience. An enormous ocean surrounds the settlement, yet human beings have begun to stitch its scattered islands together, not with roads, not with bridges, with repeated journeys. You're far out in the central Pacific now, where the scale of the ocean begins to play tricks on the mind. Daylight stretches across an almost perfect circle of water. The horizon looks smooth enough to touch, yet it may conceal islands hundreds of kilometres away. The canoe rises slowly on a long swell, pauses for the smallest instant at the crest, then settles into the trough again. Woven sailcloth tightens above you. Salt has dried white along the lashings. Somewhere inside the hull, drinking water shifts gently inside its container. There is no continent in sight. There may not be one for days, yet the people around you do not behave as though they are lost. This is the Polynesian world, one of the largest cultural regions ever connected without roads, wheeled transport, or written nautical charts. Its boundaries eventually form a vast triangle across the Pacific, with Hawaii in the north, Rapa Nui, often called Easter Island, in the southeast, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the southwest. The distances are enormous, the settlements are deliberate, and the navigational knowledge required to connect them becomes one of humanity's great intellectual achievements. You sit aboard a vessel designed for serious voyaging. In some traditions, two long hulls are joined by a strong platform. The arrangement creates a broad, stable craft capable of carrying people, food, water, tools, plants, and other supplies across open ocean. A double-hulled canoe is not merely two small boats tied together and wished good luck. Its proportions matter. The hulls must work together. The crossbeams must withstand twisting forces. Lashings must remain strong while repeatedly soaked by spray. Weight must be distributed carefully. Too much cargo on one side can alter performance. Too much weight overall lowers the vessel dangerously. You place your palm against a lashing. The cord feels tight and slightly rough, under strain. the entire craft can flex. That flexibility helps it endure waves that would punish a completely rigid frame. Above you, the sail changes shape as the helmsman adjusts course. Polynesian sailing canoes develop forms suited to long-distance travel, including sophisticated hull shapes and sails capable of using winds from useful angles. Sailing directly into the wind remains impossible, but clever handling allows a canoe to travel across the wind and work gradually toward destinations that are not conveniently downwind. This matters because an ocean does not arrange its weather around your plans. You cannot simply choose Hawaii and demand a cooperative breeze. Voyages require seasonal judgment. Certain wind patterns become more favourable at particular times. Storm seasons must be respected. Calm periods create their own dangers. A canoe without enough wind can drift while food and water continue to disappear. So departure is itself a navigational decision. You may spend days watching the sky from shore before launching. Cloud movement, wind direction, sea conditions, the behaviour of birds, everything contributes. Then there comes a morning when experienced voyagers agree. The route is open, the canoe leaves. Once land disappears, the navigator begins maintaining a mental picture that may contain dozens or even hundreds of remembered relationships. Direction is not reduced to a compass bearing. Instead, the voyage exists inside a living framework. Certain stars rise and set in predictable parts of the horizon. The sun provides broad orientation during the day. Ocean swells continue beneath changing local winds. Birds indicate proximity to land. Clouds reveal atmospheric disturbances caused by islands. But Polynesian wayfinding can go further than simply following individual signs. The navigator keeps track of where the canoe has travelled. You might call it dead reckoning, although the traditional mental process can be far richer than that phrase suggests. You estimate speed. You remember how long the canoe has followed a particular heading. You notice when the wind changes. You account for sideways drift. You maintain an internal sense of where the destination should now lie. Nothing is written down. The chart is inside a trained mind. That creates enormous pressure. You cannot casually announce halfway through the voyage that you seem to have misplaced the map. You are the map. Navigation knowledge therefore becomes something learned over years. An apprentice memorizes stars, islands, seasonal winds, sea behaviour, and routes. Lessons may involve stories, recitation, observation, and direct practice. A skilled navigator learns not merely what to look at, but when to distrust it. A star disappears behind cloud. Fine. Use the swell. The swell becomes confused by local weather. Then use wind, birds, or the expected movement of sunrise. Every clue has limits. Skill lies in combining them. Records confirm that Polynesian societies successfully settle some of the most isolated habitable islands on Earth centuries before European ships enter those waters. Hawaii is one astonishing example. The Hawaiian Islands sit more than 3,000 kilometres from the nearest continent. To reach them from central eastern Polynesia requires sustained open ocean voyaging over immense distance. You imagine the final days of such a journey. Fresh water is rationed carefully. Food stores have been inspected many times. The crew scans the sky with growing intensity. The ocean appears stubbornly empty. Then signs begin to accumulate. A bird passes at an hour when its behaviour suggests land. More birds appear. Clouds seem to gather repeatedly over one area. Floating vegetation passes the hull. The navigator alters course slightly. At last, high volcanic land rises from the horizon. The first sight may be cloud rather than mountain. Then dark slopes become visible beneath it. The emotional change aboard the canoe must be immense. What had existed as knowledge, calculation, and trust suddenly becomes rock. Hawaii offers fertile volcanic soils, freshwater streams, forests, reefs, and valleys suitable for agriculture. Settlers bring crops that already support life across much of Polynesia. Taro, Sweet potato eventually becomes crucial, breadfruit, banana, coconut, where conditions allow. They also transport animals such as pigs, dogs, and chickens. These introductions reshape island ecosystems. A Hawaiian landscape increasingly becomes managed through irrigation, gardens, fish ponds, and carefully organized use of upland and coastal resources. An ocean voyage has created the foundation for an entire society. Far to the southeast lies an even stranger destination, Rapa Nui. The island is small, its isolation is severe. From the deck of a canoe, missing it by a modest navigational error could mean continuing into an enormous emptiness. Yet Polynesian settlers reach it. You approach a coast lined with dark volcanic rock. The island rises from the sea with rolling slopes and extinct volcanic craters. There are no surrounding archipelagos offering easy correction. This is a lonely target. Its settlement demonstrates not simply courage, but extraordinary confidence in voyaging knowledge. Over generations, the inhabitants create one of the world's most recognizable sculptural traditions, the moai. Large stone figures are carved from volcanic rock and transported to ceremonial platforms called ahu. Their backs face the sea at many sites while their faces look inland toward communities. Oddly enough, many people casually describe the moai as giant stone heads, but most are complete torsos whose bodies were simply less visually obvious when partly buried by accumulated soil. The detail is charmingly appropriate. Even some of the most famous objects in the world can spend centuries being misunderstood from the neck down. The statues also remind you that distant ocean settlements are not cultural backwaters. Rapa Nui develops complex religious, political, artistic, and engineering traditions despite extreme isolation. The ocean limits contact. It does not limit imagination. Thousands of kilometres southwest lies another enormous challenge, Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is very different from tropical Polynesia. The islands stretch through cooler latitudes. Winters become real. Forests contain unfamiliar species. Large, flightless birds, including moa, occupy the landscape when Polynesian settlers arrive. The farming package that works comfortably in tropical islands now faces colder conditions. Coconut palms are no help here. Breadfruit dislikes the climate. Many familiar crops struggle. Human adaptation changes rapidly. Kumara, the sweet potato, becomes especially important because it can grow in suitable parts of the country when carefully managed. Storage pits protect harvests. Gardens are positioned to capture warmth. Communities develop techniques appropriate to a cooler environment. Clothing becomes more substantial. Local fibres, especially flax species, acquire major practical importance. Fishing continues, but hunting and gathering take new forms. You step onto a New Zealand shore and smell something almost shocking after years of tropical imagination. Cold air, wet forest, earth, wood smoke rising through mist. The settlement of Aotearoa shows that Polynesian voyaging is not simply a tropical phenomenon. People cross a major open ocean distance and then transform their way of life to fit a dramatically different climate. The ancestors of Maori communities established themselves across these islands, creating regional traditions shaped by mountains, rivers, forests, and coastlines. The ocean that brought them here remains central to identity. Canoes become woven into genealogy and memory. Named voyaging traditions connect communities to ancestral arrivals. The vessel is not merely transportation, it becomes part of who people understand themselves to be. This cultural importance makes navigation more than a practical skill. A route can contain history. A star can carry ancestral meaning. An island can be remembered through stories describing how it was found, approached, named, or settled. Oral tradition becomes a vessel of its own. It carries information through time. Scholars bicker over the precise chronology and pathways of some Polynesian expansions. particularly how often communities maintain two-way contact after initial settlement. For decades, one older picture imagined exploration as mostly one-directional movement into ever more distant islands. Evidence now encourages a more complicated view. Voyagers can return, routes can remain active, plants, artifacts, language, and genetic signals sometimes reveal exchange across impressive distances. Historians still argue whether every tradition describing long-return voyages preserves literal memories of specific historical journeys or blends remembered navigation with genealogy, symbolism, and later storytelling. Oral traditions must be treated with both respect and careful interpretation. They can preserve remarkable knowledge. They can also change as communities retell them. The debate does not reduce their importance. It highlights how many kinds of evidence are needed to understand an oceanic past. One especially intriguing question concerns contact between Polynesia and South America. The sweet potato is central to the discussion. This crop originates in the Americas, yet it's present in Polynesia before sustained European involvement in the Pacific. Its Polynesian names also resemble terms found in parts of South America. Genetic evidence from both plants and people has intensified discussion of prehistoric contact across the eastern Pacific. No agreement has been reached on every detail of when, where, and how contact occurs. Some researchers argue for Polynesian voyages reaching the American coast. Others examine possibilities involving movement in the opposite direction or multiple episodes of exchange. The debate continues because the Pacific preserves clues without providing a convenient captain's diary. You're left with plants, genes, languages, winds, currents, and the proven abilities of sailors who already cross astonishing distances elsewhere. Standing aboard the canoe, the possibility no longer feels absurd. The scale of Polynesian voyaging changes your sense of what a map means. Modern maps make the Pacific look empty because they colour land and leave water blank. For navigators, the opposite can be true. Water contains roots, currents have personalities, swells preserve direction, stars organise the night, island chains form relationships, names attach memory to places that outsiders might dismiss as tiny dots. You're not travelling across emptiness. You're moving through a known environment. Night settles gradually. The temperature drops. Someone adjusts the sail. A star rises low above the horizon, exactly where the navigator expects it. The canoe turns slightly. The wake trails pale behind you. No land is visible. No instrument glows. There is only the quiet confidence of knowledge carried inside people, refined through generations of departures and returns. Somewhere beyond the dark curve of the sea lies an island. You cannot see it yet, but you know how to look for it. You're standing on another shore now, but this one does not face a neat chain of neighbouring islands. The water stretches outward with fewer clues. To the west may lie Africa, to the east, India and the islands beyond. Farther still are coastlines separated by distances so large that, for centuries, historians have argued over who might have crossed them, when, and why. This is where the history of ocean travel becomes less certain. Some voyages are well supported by archaeology, language, genetics, and surviving traditions. Others exist only as possibilities. A seed appears where it seems not to belong. A carving resembles something from another continent. An ancient text describes unfamiliar sailors. A genetic pattern raises questions. A plant turns up thousands of kilometers from its original homeland, and suddenly scholars begin politely disagreeing with one another for several decades. You begin in the Indian Ocean. It is an enormous body of water, but it has one advantage for ancient sailors: its winds are seasonal. Across much of the northern Indian Ocean, the monsoon system reverses direction during different parts of the year. For sailors who understand this rhythm, distance becomes more manageable. You do not have to fight the same prevailing wind in both directions. You can travel with one seasonal pattern and return when the winds change. That creates something valuable: predictability. Imagine waiting on a warm coast while boats are loaded with food, pottery, cloth, beads, or useful plants. The wind has been watched for weeks. Then its direction settles, sails rise, the shore begins to recede. The open water ahead may still be dangerous, but you're not simply hoping for favourable weather. You're using a recurring atmospheric system. This eventually helps connect Arabia, Eastern Africa, India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia into broad maritime networks. Long before modern global trade, the Indian Ocean becomes a place where goods and people can move astonishing distances. Records confirm that sailors and merchants crossed sections of this ocean in antiquity, creating contacts between African, Arabian, South Asian, and Southeast Asian communities. But one of the most remarkable migrations takes you far beyond ordinary trading routes. You arrive on Madagascar. The island lies off the southeastern coast of Africa, separated from the mainland by the Mozambique Channel. At first glance, you might expect its early human population to be closely related only to nearby African peoples. But language tells a stranger story. Malagasy, the principal language of Madagascar, belongs to the Austronesian language family. Its closest linguistic relatives are found not in Africa, but thousands of kilometers away in island Southeast Asia, particularly around southern Borneo. You pause over that distance. It is enormous. Some ancestors of the Malagasy population cross much of the Indian Ocean from Southeast Asia. Others arrive from Eastern Africa. The societies that develop on Madagascar combine these ancestries and traditions in complex ways. The island becomes a meeting place created by ocean travel. You walk through an imagined early settlement. Cooking fires burn beside wooden houses. Rice may be cultivated in suitable environments. Cattle become important. Words spoken around you contain echoes of Southeast Asia, while customs, ancestry, crops, and technologies also reveal strong African connections. The Indian Ocean has brought distant worlds together. This is a mainstream historical fact supported by multiple forms of evidence. The precise routes, timing, and sequence of migration remain debated. But the Southeast Asian contribution to Malagasy ancestry and language is unmistakable. How do those travellers get there? Possibly through direct or staged voyages. Perhaps they move through trading networks that already connect Southeast Asia to India and the Western Indian Ocean. Perhaps groups travel gradually, stopping at intermediate ports. The original journey may not be one heroic crossing from Borneo directly to Madagascar. Ancient movement rarely follows the neat, straight lines drawn on modern maps. People can migrate in stages. One generation moves to a new port, another travels farther. Marriage and trade connect communities along the route. Eventually descendants live thousands of kilometers from the homeland of their ancestors. The voyage becomes a chain. The ocean becomes a corridor. A curious footnote appears in a humble crop. Bananas of Asian origin spread into Africa in ancient times, although researchers continue debating exactly when and by which routes. Their movement matters because bananas do not cross oceans independently with much enthusiasm. Human beings carry useful plants, so when crops appear far outside their natural ranges, they can become clues to forgotten connections. Plants are unusually quiet travellers. They leave no memoirs. They simply grow somewhere unexpected and force future scholars to explain themselves. You move northward toward the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. Here, ancient Egyptian, Arabian, Persian, Indian, and later Mediterranean sailors participate in increasingly organized maritime exchange. Egyptian expeditions travel south along the Red Sea toward a region known in surviving texts as Punt. The exact location of Punt remains debated, though areas around the Horn of Africa and southern Red Sea are frequently considered. Ships carry incense, precious woods, animal products, and other goods. The journey demonstrates that states can organize substantial sea expeditions long before the classical Mediterranean reaches its later commercial heights. Farther east, ports along the coast of India participate in networks that eventually connect with Arabia and Southeast Asia. Sailors learn coastal routes, merchants understand seasonal timing, knowledge accumulates at harbours. A captain does not need to know the entire ocean personally. He needs access to people who know the next stage. This produces maritime chains of expertise. One pilot understands a dangerous gulf. Another knows the entrance to a distant river. Another recognizes the stars used farther south. Ocean knowledge can be shared like trade goods. Now your attention turns toward the Atlantic. This ocean presents different problems. Its scale is immense. Its current systems can carry vessels across vast distances. That immediately creates a difficult historical question. If a boat can drift across an ocean, does evidence of something unusual on the far shore prove intentional contact? Not necessarily. This distinction is crucial. Objects can move without planned voyages. Seeds float. Storms drive vessels away from land. A small crew can survive an accidental crossing without creating sustained contact between civilizations. So scholars demand stronger evidence before accepting claims of ancient transoceanic encounters. The Atlantic has attracted many such claims. People have proposed contacts between ancient Egyptians and the Americas, between West Africans and the Americas, between Phoenicians and distant Western lands, and between various American societies and Europe or Africa long before the best documented crossings. Some ideas are plausible enough to investigate. Others rely on weak similarities. A pyramid appears on two continents and someone immediately declares an ocean voyage. But pyramidal structures are also an efficient way to build tall monuments using stone. Similar shapes do not automatically prove contact. The same caution applies to art. A face carved in stone may remind a viewer of people from another region. That resemblance can be emotionally persuasive. It is not necessarily historical evidence. Human faces share features. Artists stylize. Weather erodes. Expectations influence interpretation. You begin to appreciate why archaeological debates can become so stubborn. Everyone is looking at the same object. Not everyone sees the same story. One famous case involves claims of pre-Columbian contact between West Africa and the Americas. Medieval Arabic sources preserve accounts suggesting that rulers or sailors from the Mali Empire may have launched Atlantic expeditions. One tradition describes a predecessor of Mansa Musa sending fleets westward into the ocean. Whether any of these vessels reached the Americas is unknown. The Atlantic currents off West Africa can, in principle, carry ships toward the Western Atlantic, but possibility is not proof. No archaeological evidence currently demonstrates a sustained medieval Malian presence in the Americas. Historians still argue whether such expedition stories record genuine large-scale attempts, symbolic royal traditions, misunderstood reports, or events whose outcomes can no longer be recovered. The uncertainty is part of the story. People may attempt voyages without succeeding. History usually remembers arrivals. It rarely remembers those who sail out and vanish. You watch an imagined vessel leave the West African coast. The sail catches a steady wind. Food and water are stored aboard. The sailors may intend exploration. They may intend trade. They may expect land. Or perhaps they simply trust that an ocean must have another side. Weeks later, no surviving record tells you what happens. The silence is haunting. It also demands discipline. You cannot turn silence into certainty simply because a mystery is attractive. The Americas provide another puzzle through biological evidence. Certain plants and animals appear in places that raise questions about ancient movement. Coconuts, cotton varieties, gourds, and other species have all been discussed in relation to possible human-assisted ocean crossings. But biology is complicated. Some seeds survive seawater. Natural rafting occurs. Birds transport material. Dating can be difficult. Later human movement can contaminate earlier patterns. Every proposed contact requires its own evidence. Scholars bicker over which biological clues genuinely indicate human voyages and which can be explained by natural dispersal. No agreement has been reached on several famous cases, and that uncertainty can be more interesting than a simple answer. It shows you how historians work when evidence is incomplete. You weigh probability. You compare explanations. You ask which theory requires the fewest unsupported assumptions. You resist the temptation to promote a beautiful story merely because it is beautiful. Ancient sailors deserve better than fantasy. Their real achievements are remarkable enough. There are also cases where skepticism has been overturned by evidence. For centuries, some outsiders underestimated how far non-European societies could travel by sea. Later archaeology, experimental voyaging, linguistic research, and genetic studies repeatedly demonstrated that ancient maritime skill was greater than many scholars once assumed. That history encourages humility. You should not accept every dramatic contact theory, but you should not dismiss distant voyaging merely because it feels difficult from the comfort of land. Difficulty has never stopped humans consistently. Sometimes it barely slows them down. The coastlines around the Indian Ocean prove how connected ancient maritime societies can become. African ivory reaches distant markets. Indian beads appear far from India. Southeast Asian plants spread westward. Arabian incense travels north. Sailors exchange techniques along with cargo. A vessel arrives carrying objects. It also carries accents, recipes, religious ideas, stories, measurements, songs, diseases, marriage possibilities, news of rulers and ports beyond the horizon. Trade changes imagination. Once someone in your community owns an object from a distant coast, that coast becomes more real. Perhaps you hold a bead as made from material unavailable locally. Someone tells you it came from a place many days across the water. You've never seen that place, but now it exists inside your mental world. A trade network makes geography social. Distance becomes relationship. Even without traveling personally, you become connected to people you will never meet. This is one of the deepest consequences of ocean contact. The sea expands the human idea of the world. You stand at dusk beside a harbour where several kinds of vessels rest in shallow water. One design comes from the local tradition. Another has features borrowed from foreign builders. This sense of resin, fish, spices, smoke, and wet rope mingle in the air. Voices use unfamiliar words. A trader gestures toward goods spread on a mat. A sailor describes a coast beyond the horizon. You cannot verify every story. Some are exaggerated, some are misunderstood, some are completely true. That, too, feels very human. Across the darkness, distant continents remain invisible, yet they are no longer unimaginable. The ocean has become a place where certainty and mystery travel side by side, and sometimes the smallest clue, a word, a seed, a bone, a shard of pottery, is enough to suggest that somewhere in the distant past a boat went farther than anyone expected. You stand on a quiet shoreline where the tide has just begun to turn. The water moves across the sand in thin silver sheets, carrying fragments of shell, smooth pieces of wood, and tiny trails of foam. Behind you lies a human world transformed by journeys that once seemed almost impossible. Villages have become ports. Islands have become homelands. Distant coasts have become trading partners. Plants, animals, languages, beliefs, tools, and memories have moved with people across the sea. The most important thing ancient ocean crossings change is not simply where humans live. They change what distance means. A stretch of water that once separates communities can become a route connecting them. Once people know that another coast exists, that knowledge does not easily disappear. A canoe leaves. It returns carrying unfamiliar stone. Someone brings a fruit no one in the village has tasted before. A visitor speaks with a different accent. A marriage joins two families separated by water. An elder describes a storm encountered beyond the horizon. The world becomes larger and, strangely, more connected at the same time. Human migration is the most visible result. Ocean travel allows people to settle environments unreachable by walking. Islands acquire permanent populations. Coastlines become starting points instead of boundaries. Communities adapt to coral atolls, volcanic islands, tropical forests, cold southern shores, and remote archipelagos. The process changes human geography permanently. You can see it most clearly when you imagine a map without political borders. Instead of countries, you see paths. One line stretches from island to island. Another follows seasonal winds. Another connects fishing grounds. Another marks a remembered migration. The ocean fills with invisible roads. Over generations, those roads become part of identity. A family remembers where ancestors came from. A community remembers the direction of another island. A people associate particular stars with important routes. Geography becomes genealogy. The sea is not merely space, it is ancestry. Records confirm that maritime migration helps create some of the widest language distributions in human history. Austronesian languages, for example, eventually spread across a region reaching from Madagascar through island Southeast Asia and deep into the Pacific. That extraordinary range does not arise because words drift independently across water. People carry them. Every voyage transports language. You hear this happening in ordinary conversation. A sailor learns the local word for a fish. A visitor introduces a new term for a tool. Children grow up hearing parents from different communities. Pronunciation changes. Grammar shifts. Some words disappear. Others survive for thousands of years. Language becomes a record of human movement, although it is a record constantly rewritten by the people using it. The effect can be surprisingly durable. A simple word spoken beside a canoe may leave descendants in languages separated by enormous distances. Long after the original boat has rotted, the word continues travelling from parent to child. This is one of the gentlest forms of archaeological evidence imaginable. No excavation is required. Sometimes history survives in the mouth. Trade expands the consequences even further. Once reliable routes exist, people no longer have to migrate permanently for objects to travel. A canoe can leave home, exchange goods, and return. That creates circulation. Shell ornaments move between islands. Volcanic glass reaches communities far from its source. Stone suitable for adzes becomes valuable where good stone is scarce. Food is exchanged. Pottery travels. Fibers, pigments, feathers, resins, and decorative materials move through networks. The object that arrives may be useful. It may also be prestigious. A rare shell from another island can signal connection. A beautifully made tool may display status. Foreign goods can acquire stories simply because they come from far away. You hold a polished ornament that has crossed several stretches of ocean. Perhaps no one in your village knows the person who originally made it. Yet its movement links communities together. Trade creates relationships between strangers, and relationships encourage more travel. A successful exchange gives you a reason to return. The next voyage carries more goods. Someone joins the crew who has never travelled before. Knowledge spreads. Routes become familiar. Soon an occasional journey becomes a pattern. The sea begins to develop traffic. Not traffic with horns, lanes, and someone becoming irritated because another canoe is moving too slowly, but recognizable movement. Certain seasons bring travellers. Certain landing places become busy. Certain families specialize in exchange. The shoreline changes socially. A harbour, even a simple natural one, becomes a place where outside information enters. News arrives with boats. A distant settlement has suffered a storm. A new leader has emerged. A crop grows well on another island. A fishing technique is producing better catches. A marriage is being proposed. Someone has found a new source of stone. Information may be the most valuable cargo of all, and it weighs nothing. It can be copied endlessly, and unlike a pot, it does not shatter when dropped. Agriculture also changes through ocean voyaging. Humans carry useful species far beyond their natural distributions. You can imagine a canoe loaded with plant cuttings and seedlings. The cargo does not look dramatic. There are roots wrapped against drying. Tubers sit in baskets. Seeds are stored carefully. Perhaps a young tree is protected from salt spray. Yet these humble objects can determine whether a new settlement survives. Taro, yam, banana, breadfruit, coconut, and other crops become part of transported food systems in different regions. Animals travel too. Pigs, dogs, chickens. Their movement alters diets, labour, ritual, and ecology. It also changes islands that have never before experienced those species. Introduced animals eat native plants. They disturb nests. They compete with local wildlife. Humans clear forest for gardens. Fire modifies vegetation. Fishing affects reefs and coastal ecosystems. Ocean migration becomes ecological migration. A whole package of life moves with people. One curious footnote is that some plants become such reliable companions of human settlement that researchers sometimes use their modern genetic variation to reconstruct ancient travel. A tree can preserve a migration story. So can a chicken. So can a sweet potato. Human history hides inside organisms that never intended to become evidence. The consequences are not always gentle. New settlement can place heavy pressure on isolated ecosystems. Island animals that evolved without human hunters may be easy to capture. Birds nesting on the ground can be especially vulnerable. Some species decline rapidly, others disappear, forests are altered. Soils erode where vegetation is cleared. The arrival of humans can transform an island within generations, yet people also learn to manage fragile environments. Fishing grounds may be controlled through custom. Seasonal restrictions can protect resources. Agricultural systems become carefully adapted to limited land. Water is managed. Terraces, irrigation, storage, and soil improvement allow communities to thrive in places that initially seem marginal. The relationship is neither simple destruction nor perfect harmony. It is adaptation, pressure, experimentation, and learning. Scholars bicker over how quickly ancient island populations recognize the ecological consequences of settlement and how deliberately conservation practices emerge. Some practices may result from accumulated experience after resources decline. Others may be embedded in ritual or social restrictions that incidentally protect ecosystems. Historians still argue whether certain resource controls begin primarily as practical management, religious custom, political authority, or some combination of all three. The boundaries between those categories may be less clear in lived experience than they appear in academic writing. A rule can be sacred and practical at the same time. Ocean movement also changes culture through contact. Music travels. Decorative styles travel. Boat design spread between communities. Religious ideas move with migrants and visitors. Stories cross water and change as they are retold. A hero associated with one island becomes known on another. A genealogy incorporates a newcomer, a technique for carving, weaving, fishing, or house construction appears where it was previously unknown. Cultural exchange does not mean everything becomes identical. Often the opposite happens. People borrow selectively. A community adopts one foreign tool but rejects another. A word is borrowed while pronunciation changes. A design is copied but given local meaning. A ritual travels and becomes something new. Connection produces diversity as easily as uniformity. You can watch this happening in a village where an imported ornament lies beside a locally made one. They resemble each other. They are not the same. The maker has changed the pattern. perhaps intentionally, perhaps through imperfect copying, perhaps because local materials behave differently. Innovation often begins as adaptation. Ocean travel accelerates that process. Ideas encounter other ideas. Solutions migrate. Problems are compared. A boat builder sees an unfamiliar sail and asks whether it works better. A farmer notices a crop that survives drought. A navigator hears that another community uses a different star for a particular route. Not every borrowed technique is superior, but every encounter increases the number of possibilities available. The sea becomes a laboratory connecting thousands of communities. Political power also grows around maritime movement. A leader able to organize canoes can communicate across islands. Tribute can travel by sea. Alliances can stretch across channels. Warriors can move farther. Ceremonial exchange can reinforce relationships between distant communities. Control over harbours, skilled navigators, or boat-building resources can create influence. The canoe is no longer only a household tool. It can become political infrastructure. This changes the scale at which societies imagine themselves. An island may belong to a larger network of related communities. A ruler's authority may extend across water. Genealogies can connect leaders separated by considerable distance. Political landscapes no longer stop at beaches. Neither does conflict. The same technology that carries traders can carry raiders. The same route used for marriage visits can be used for warfare. Human beings rarely invent a transportation system and then use it only for pleasant purposes. The ocean connects cooperation and competition alike. Yet the deepest transformation may be psychological. Repeated crossings change how people imagine the planet. You do not need to know that Earth is a sphere to understand that the visible horizon is not the edge of existence. Every successful voyage teaches the same lesson. There is more land, more people, more weather, more resources, more danger, more possibility. A child raised in a maritime community grows up with a different mental world from someone who has never seen the sea. The horizon is not a wall, it is a question. You hear adults discuss places you cannot see. One island lies several days east. Another appears only under certain conditions. A distant coast produces a valuable stone. A relative lives beyond a long channel. The invisible becomes normal. That is a profound expansion of imagination. Long-distance voyaging requires trust in knowledge about places absent from sight. You believe an island exists because others have gone there. You believe a star course will lead toward it because generations have tested the route. You believe seasonal winds will change because they have changed before. Maritime life therefore depends on accumulated knowledge extending beyond personal experience. You inherit a world larger than what your own eyes have seen, and you contribute to it. Perhaps you discover a reef. You remember its location. You tell others. Your observation joins community knowledge. Generations later, someone you will never meet avoids that reef because your information survives. Knowledge becomes another form of navigation. It links people across time as surely as canoes link them across water. The coastline beneath your feet is darker now. Evening has softened the colours. The tide has risen. Small waves slide farther up the sand, briefly covering your footprints before withdrawing again. The sea erases marks quickly. Wood rots. Fibre disappears. Sails decay. Names change. Settlements move. Yet the consequences of ancient crossings remain everywhere. They survive in languages spoken across islands, in crops growing far from their wild ancestors, in family histories, in boat-building traditions, in genetic ancestry, in stories attached to stars and coastlines, in the simple fact that human beings occupy islands scattered through some of the widest waters on Earth. There is no single moment when humanity conquers the ocean. That idea is too dramatic. The real transformation happens slowly, through countless departures, experiments, failures, returns, and discoveries. Someone pushes a craft into shallow water. Someone learns a wind. Someone recognizes a bird. Someone trusts a route. Someone carries a child toward a shore that has never been home before. And little by little, the oceans stop dividing the human world. They begin connecting it. The water in front of you continues moving beneath the fading sky. Calm now, almost dark, carrying no sign of the thousands of journeys that once crossed it. You no longer need to follow them. The paddles can rest. The sail can loosen. The shoreline becomes quiet beneath the stars. You can imagine the last canoe drawn safely above the tide, the wet hull cooling in the night air while distant waves fold softly over the reef. There is food beside the fire, a place to sleep, and familiar voices settling into silence. The horizon has disappeared completely. Nothing needs to be discovered tonight. Nothing needs to be crossed. The routes can remain where they are, held gently in memory. Your breathing grows slower as the sea keeps its steady rhythm. The great journeys become small points of light, fading one by one into the distance. And for now, you're simply here, warm, still, and safe beside the quiet water, while the ancient ocean moves softly in the darkness.